Hi everybody, so in this video we're going to talk about the last practice problems related to efficiency. And this is actually a different kind of problem because it's directly from an AP question. So it says sugar is freely traded in the world market. Assume that a country, Loriland, produces some domestic sugar but imports the rest to meet their demand. The world price of sugar is $2 a pound, and the graph shows the domestic sugar market and the world price at $2. So we can see this world price is 2, domestic supply, and then domestic demand. Now, remember, it tells you right up here, they produce some domestically, but they import the rest. So anything that the world has that's, where it's $2, they're going to buy it from the world. So at the price of 2, how much is domestically supplied? So this is going to walk you through how to look at this problem. At the price of 2, the domestic supply curve stops right here at 2. So only 2 million pounds, we're just going to say 2, are domestically supplied. And how much is domestically demanded at the price of 2? Well, at the price of 2, the domestic demand is 14. It's way over here. So this is 14. So that tells us, right, they have to be importing some, and it tells us up here they produce some domestic, they import the rest. So the difference between the two, between 14 and 2, is how much is being imported. So 12. So this amount, oops, is the imports. That's the import amount from 14 to 2. At the price of 2, what's the domestic consumer surplus? Well, it's a great big triangle, right? Because it's 4, it's all the way over to 14. It's the price that they're paying, which they're paying 2, all the way up the demand curve. Right? So the domestic consumer surplus is pretty big because they're getting 14 pounds for only $2. Now, we would see that the consumer surplus, right, is 9 minus 2 is 7. That's the height times the base, which is 14 divided by 2. So that's 49. Okay. Now, at the price of 2, what's the domestic producer surplus? Well, the producers in this economy are only here, this tiny little triangle, because they're not the rest of the world. We don't care about them. It's the domestic producers. And so we don't really have a number here. So I'm just going to put 1, and that will allow us to answer this problem, because otherwise you can't. But if we know that the height of the triangle is 1 and the base is 2, and then we divide by 2, it's just going to be 1. So it's a very small amount of producer surplus and a whole lot of consumer surplus. So let's assume that Loriland puts a per unit tariff on imported sugar imports, right? So just the imported stuff, and the new domestic price, including the tariff, is 4. So what does that mean? Well, it means that world price just shifts up to 4. So now we're up to here. So this is the world price, we'll say new, right? The new world price. Now, at this per unit amount of the tariff, well, how much did we shift the curve up by? Well, we went from PW to PW new, we went from 2 to 4. So the amount that curve had to shift up by was $2. At the price of 4, what's the new level of domestic production? Well, now we just say, okay, we repeat the process we did up in the top, and we just do it again, but with $4. So the domestic production is now here at 6. And the domestic demand is only 10, right? So at the price of 4, how much are they importing now? Well, instead, now they're only importing from 10 to 6, which that's only 4. Now, this is a tricky one, the total tariff revenue collected by the government. Now, in this one, just remember that tax revenue, or tariff revenue, is the quantity that are being applied to, right? So however many units there are times the tax itself. So how much was the tax? The tax was 2. Okay, the tax was 2. We have that answer. How many are actually being imported? We just answered that question, 4. So the 2 times 4 gives us the total tariff revenue, 8. On the graph, it's actually a little bit hard to see this. It's these 2 that are being imported, or these 4 that are being imported, here to here, and it's this box. It's a little strange to think about, but that's the tax revenue box in this picture. At the price of 4, what's the domestic consumer surplus? Well, we go 4 up to 9, and then over here to 10. And so the height of the triangle is 5 times 10 divided by 2 is 25. So we cut the consumer surplus almost in half. At the price of 4, what's the domestic producer surplus? Well, now they're getting 4, right? They're getting 4, and they're going to be over to 6 and down here to this 1. So the height of that triangle is 3 times 6 divided by 2 is 9. So we cut the consumer surplus in basically in half, but we made the producer surplus much larger, right? So the producers are probably going to be pretty happy. Now, given the world price of $2, what's the tariff that would maximize the total surplus in lorry land? Now, this is a really tricky question. I want you to ponder it for a second, right? Imagine that we had maybe instead of a $2 tariff, because remember that's $2, if we had a $3 tariff, right? If PW new was way up here. Well, if we were way up here, right, and we just set that new line up here, then they wouldn't import any at all, would they? Because the domestic supply would just equal the domestic demand. And so this amount would be the total surplus. But that doesn't include this stuff here, right? And remember, before any of the tariffs at all, it would included all of this was actually part of the surplus. So the correct answer, and hopefully this shouldn't be too bad because we've been talking about inefficiency this whole time, is 0. The maximum surplus would just not have a tariff at all. Now, one last thing about this graph that I want to show you is once the tariff's in place in this picture with PW new, there's deadweight loss because there's transactions that aren't happening. And the deadweight loss is here, here, and here. It's these 3 triangles. Now, it's not the box in the middle because that box is getting turned into tax revenue, and we assume that it's going to be spent somehow, effectively. But the other 3 triangles used to be surplus. They used to be part of the consumer surplus up here in this top section. But now they're just gone, disappeared. They haven't turned into tax revenue. They haven't turned into anything. So they don't benefit anybody at all. So we would say that's the deadweight loss. Actually, hang on. I had a brain fart. It's not this box, not that one. Brain fart, not that deadweight. It's just this one and this one. Because this part up here is actually part of the consumer surplus. All right, so hopefully I've helped you and not confused you too much with this problem. See you next time.